Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, indicating Thursday that DHS may reduce the number of immigrant enforcement officers in Minnesota, but there's a catch. Let's listen.
The withdrawal of law enforcement resources here is dependent upon cooperation. Like I said, one agent arresting one bad guy in jail means less agents on the street. We have some agreements. We got more to talk about how we're going to implement those agreements. But as we see that cooperation happen, then the redeployment will happen.
That comes after Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey wrote in a social media post on Tuesday that, quote, Minneapolis does not and will not enforce federal immigration laws, just hours after he and Minnesota Governor Walz met with Homan.
But despite being open to reducing the number of agents in the state, Homan says ICE won't give up on their mission there.
We're going to enforce immigration law. For the people to say we're here to surrender our authority and the mission of enforcing immigration law, you are wrong. We're going to do target enforcement operations, and we're going to prioritize the public safety threats and national security threats. That is what we're here to do. We are not surrendering our mission at all. We're just doing it smarter.
Homan also had a warning for anti-ICE protesters. Take a listen.
Every First Amendment rights, I support that. You have the right to protest. I'm just asking you to keep it peaceful. But threatening law enforcement officers, engaging in impeding and obstruction and assault is never okay. And there will be zero tolerance. You interfere, impede, assault ICE officers, you will be arrested.
Meantime, Frey was in D.C. yesterday to address the U.S. Conference of Mayors, where he took aim at the Trump administration and issued this warning to his fellow mayors.
Push for this concept, calling it the iron law of the world, that might makes right. Stephen Miller is wrong. We are on the front lines of a very important battle, and it's important that we aren't silenced, that we aren't put down. This is not a time to bend our heads in despair or out of fear that we may be next, because if we do not speak up, if we do not step out, it will be your city that is next.
Meantime, the budget battle over DHS funding continues on Capitol Hill. Republicans in Congress said Thursday that the White House is on board with the Democrats' plan to separate DHS funding from the so-called minibus in order to pass the remainder of the funding package and keep the government open. But now, after objections raised by Republican Senator Lindsey Graham over the length of DHS funding and a provision related to so-called Arctic frost, the investigation that is, that deal may be up in the air. The deadline to avoid a government shutdown is midnight tonight.
Well, you know what? I think Homan being the adult in the room, I mean, he's been mature about this whole thing. He's been on like the Sunday shows and doing interviews saying we need to wait and get all the information and get all the investigation details before we rush to judgment. So I appreciate that. But he's always been super firm on immigration. And the fact that he is like the middle ground, the mediator, is so shows you how far maybe we went off the deep end, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that in terms of goals, he's consistent with Kristi Noem and other members of DHS. But the difference is that he has massive amounts of experience and actually knows how to carry out these operations. And I think Tom Homan should have been running this operation from the jump. And the fact that we let Kristi Noem sort of lead the charge, make all of these public statements that were too quick, getting ahead of investigations, and really just, I think, trying to make this a way to build her personal profile as opposed to actually executing the mission, has been a little unserious. And I remember on this show saying when Trump was first building his cabinet that I was skeptical of the DHS secretary pick, and have always been critical of Kristi Noem. So I'm glad to see that Tom Homan is getting his time to shine. If the reports are true that Noem and Corey Lewandowski tried to sideline him, then that is totally unacceptable and she needs to go.
I think there's a conversation that's not happening publicly between, let's say, Stephen Miller, Kristi Noem, and the president. I think publicly facing, the president seems like he's saying, or he has been saying, Kristi Noem is not about to lose her job. But privately, we know there's a lot of finger pointing, or even Kristi Noem told Axios, like, I follow the direction of Stephen Miller and the president. And so that to me screams out loud, they told me to say this, so back off. And so I don't really understand what's going on, but I know that Homan said something that really sat with me, saying like, everything that we've done here has not been perfect. So he's at least acknowledging that there's room for improvement. But I think he's actually saying something that is common sense. And in this instance, I will say that Mayor Fry keeps doubling down when Walz and Trump are having a conversation. I don't think that that's appropriate. We're not at the time to keep bringing the temperature up. He has to figure out how to communicate. People are elected officials because we need them to work together. The president is also being childish by coming at Fry when Homan's in there trying to do a good job. So I'll call everybody out, but it's the time now to figure out what the next steps look like for immigration reform. And Homan is asking, well, if you allow us access to prisons, because most of the country said under Biden, we don't want violent criminals in the streets. So depending on people are arrested for, I guess we can litigate that later. But if they allow them access to prisons, maybe they won't be in the streets trying to find people that people are saying in factories or at work or at schoolyards.
I feel like I'm taking crazy pills because I've been saying this for weeks, but it's
well,
true.
No, I'm hearing what Homan is saying, but that's not what was being acted. I think when you and I talk about it, I'm like, well, the Joe Rogans and everyone else in the world is like, why are we seeing factories getting taken out? And we've debated about how much that affects the economy or opens up room for people to get higher wages and forces companies to pay Americans properly. Like there's a lot of arguments around it. But the goal has always been for even people that were critical of Biden like me and his immigration policies, that this is what we're doing is not effective and not working. But I think taking people away from like the factories that are working and trying to build our economy also wasn't working. And so people are asking these sanctuary cities to at least look at the criminals in the jails. I think that's a better start than what we're doing here and what Kristi Noem was doing already in Minnesota, because that was not, being on the streets about a mile away from a school building is not the same thing as being near a jail. Being, at people pulling parents out of cars as they're dropping their kids off at school is not the same thing as being at a jail. I think these are drastically different measures.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that was the point that I was making last week, which is that when sanctuary cities don't cooperate with federal law enforcement or federal immigration officials, for them to deport people, they have to pick them up on the street, right? Because they don't honor ICE detainers at jails or at courthouses. So they're not getting a call from the police saying, hey, this guy will honor your detainer for X number of hours. If you pick him up before then, no problem, you can deport him. They don't do that. So ICE has no way of knowing when people are being released, when people are being arrested, how long they'll be held, et cetera. And you can't expect ICE officers to camp outside of every jail, right, for an unlimited amount of time. So it's just logistically incredibly useful for those local police and those local jails to work with ICE, and we haven't seen that. Now, the complicating factor here is that even if Walz and Trump make a deal, if Jacob Fry refuses to comply, I'm not sure that Tim Walz is going to be willing to put the pressure on the Minneapolis police and the local level to make Jacob Fry actually comply with the administration, because we have the local, state, and federal delineation, right, of law enforcement, and immigration is the responsibility of the federal government. The state may cooperate, but what about those local police under Jacob Fry? And so that's the sort of complicating factor. Is he going to be trying to blow up this deal that the administration is trying to cut with Minnesota?
And I think because I lived in Denver, I understand how the sanctuary cities are perceived. But before we went in with ICE officers, I think the conversation should have been had that's being had now. No matter what they said online or on social media or to constituents to get better promotion of their policies, the president should have called these mayors and local officials to figure out what a better way forward looked like, because we could have avoided a lot of what happened.
All right, up next, Don Lemon has been arrested by federal agents. Don't go anywhere.